Hello, everybody, and welcome back to English 2367. This is K-Swizzle checking in for week 5. Very happy to have a voice again. Very relieved to be feeling so much better than in week 4 and also in week 2. And basically, just generally feeling so much better than I felt the first half of this class. I definitely want to thank you again for your patience, your understanding, and just like your adaptability to the wildness that has been this first month of the semester. I have never had a start of a semester like this where I'm just as sick as I have been. And so I super appreciate your patience with me as I, am mostly over having COVID, still a little bit of a lingering cough, but like I said, a way better place than I was in last week. So I am apologetic that these lectures are coming up a lot later than I would normally like them to be posted. But again, appreciate you being understanding that I'm just trying to roll with the punches best I can to get you, the quality of content that is important to me to give you in terms of these supplemental materials. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about my week 5 overview. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Should be visible on your side now. There we go. All right. So again, this is my week 5 overview lecture. And during this point, I'm going to really talk about the ways that the course is shifting for the duration of our time together, because as you'll notice from the syllabus and scheduled assignments materials, we have the class divided into part 1 and part 2, and we are officially entering into part 2 of the semester, given that this is an accelerated course. So what that means is that we have 3 sections to the overview as usual, but the sections look a little bit different than they've looked up until now in terms of the kind of, contents of each of these sections. So we will be talking about this week's theme of selecting a final project topic, thinking of research in steps, more so from a practical place as opposed to a theoretical one like we've done for the weeks 1 through 4. We will then move to talking about this week's to-do list and especially the important changes to week 5 deadlines that I have adjusted due to my own unavailability during week 4. And then we'll wrap up this overview lecture with assignment snapshots of an overview of week 5 assignments that, consist of the rough draft of research proposal and the peer feedback on research proposals. So let's talk about this week's theme, which again is selecting a final project topic, thinking of research in steps. Now, if you'll recall from our discussions at the beginning of the semester, and if you look at the syllabus, you'll recall that we have a semester research project for English 2367. Now, for our purposes, it's going to be a 3-part process. When you take this class in fall or spring with me, it's a 5-part process because the semester is longer, but instead we will be doing 3 steps to get us from point A to ultimately turning in this final project that, as you can see on the left side of the screen, is worth 50% of your final grade. And so while there are some smaller steps that we're going to be taking between this week and the end of the semester towards completing these larger projects and just larger assignments, the reason that I have these smaller steps to accompany them is because these are large ticket items in terms of high point value assignments. And so it's important to me to make sure that there are some feedback opportunities for you that will allow you to sort of work out any questions or issues that you have on smaller assignments like rough drafts, so that by the time you turn in a final draft, you can ideally have a higher scoring and higher performing assignment that you've turned in for credit. So the 3 parts of the semester research project are as follows. They're the research proposal, the literature review, and the final project. And this is going to be what takes up the rest of our time together, or part 2 of English 2367. So in terms of a visual breakdown, the research proposal is 1 to 2 pages and counts for 5% of your final grade. The literature review is 5 to 6 pages and counts for 15% of your final grade. And the final project is 8 to 10 pages or alternate format and counts for 30% of your final grade. Now, I'm going to be talking more substantially about the literature review and the final project in my focus lecture for this week, namely because what you'll find for this month is that not only are we building to this final project, but these assignments that you see displayed on the screen are scaffolded, which means that you're going to be focusing on the same topic and the same text from the research proposal through the literature review through the final project. And so you can really think about the research proposal and the literature review as being an opportunity for you to test drive ideas and kind of argumentative focus for that final project that you'll be turning in. And this is purposeful on my part. So from a course design perspective, I want you to have the opportunity to really pitch the idea that you have for your final project with the research proposal, and then expand on that by doing some secondary research and thinking about how you might use it in terms of your literature review. And then both of those pieces really contribute to what you ultimately put together for the final project. So like I said, I'll talk more substantially about what a literature review and a final project consist of in my focus lecture. But for now, I want to really make you aware of the fact that these 3 assignments are connected to each other. And so you'll be really staying with one idea for the duration of the semester. In terms of a visual breakdown of when you're turning in these assignments and what these assignments consist of in terms of smaller pieces, the research proposal, literature review, and final project all have 3 steps associated with them, okay? So the research proposal has a rough draft that's due on Saturday, June 11th, peer feedback on research proposals that's due on Monday, June 13th, and a final draft that's due on Wednesday, June 15th. The literature review has a rough draft due on Saturday, June 18th, me providing feedback to you in week 6 to 7, so a step that I take over and is not one that you have to actively do anything for, and a final draft that's due on Wednesday, June 22nd. Then finally, the final project has a rough draft due on Saturday, June 25th, peer feedback on semester research project due on Wednesday, June 29th, and your final draft is due on Saturday, July 2nd. Now, with all of these phases to these projects, or these assignments, I should say, the goal is that you're submitting a rough draft that will receive feedback from someone. Now, when it comes to the research proposal and the final project, that feedback will be coming from your peers in addition to being from me. So you'll get kind of 2 layers of feedback. Whereas with the literature review, the exclusive feedback you're getting is from me, not from your peers. But all of this is meant to culminate in the final drafts that you're turning in for each of these assignments. And the idea is that your final draft is always kind of consulting to some degree the feedback that you received on the rough draft to help you perform in a more kind of just effective and just clearer way by the time you turn in that final. So rather than having you turn in a draft that you just get the grade that you get, the goal that I have here is that those rough drafts are receiving feedback from me and from your peers to help you turn in a final draft that you're most proud of and most comfortable with. And ideally, we'll get the most usability out of in terms of, moving forward and kind of thinking about your final project's final draft. So to kind of concentrate on what you really need to think about for this week, besides what I'll cover in the focus lecture, I want to move us to talking about this week's to-do list, and especially just remind you of some important changes to the week 5 deadlines. If you read my Carmen message that I sent at the start of this week, this information is going to look pretty repetitive. And so excuse me, depending on how comfortable you are with that information, it might be fine for you to go ahead and skip this portion of the lecture. However, I do think it's good just to be reminded of this information in case it was not as clear in my Carmen message, or just if you haven't had a chance to look at that message just yet. So as my first reminder, I am offering extended office hours this week on both Tuesday, June 7th and Thursday, June 9th. This is to recognize the fact that I wasn't able to hold office hours last week, and I want to be able to provide you with the option of meeting with me if you find that would be beneficial for your writing process, and just getting acquainted with the semester research project I'm going to talk about at length in my focus lecture. So whereas my normal office hours are from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern on these days, you'll see on the left side of the screen that I've got my revised dates and times available here for you. So on Tuesday, June 7th, I will have 3 hours of office hours, and they will run from 11 o'clock a.m. to 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So 3 hours that you can check in. On Thursday, June 9th, I will have 3 hours of office hours again, but they'll have a different start and end time. So they'll start at 10 o'clock a.m. and they'll end at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Now, this is purposeful on my part. I wanted to create more opportunities for these hours to be accessible to you, just in case the runtime for Tuesday or Thursday doesn't work as well with your schedule. I wanted to create a variation so that you could hopefully use that instead. And in both of these cases, excuse me, the idea here is that you're able to meet with me synchronously over Zoom if you would like to. I'm happy to look at assignment drafts. I'm happy to talk about assignments you've already turned in and maybe want to get some help, changing some things or revising some strategies moving forward. I'm happy to talk about your research proposal. Maybe you want to talk about your response paper too, since you've got extended time before you have to turn that in, right? Whatever it might be, know that I am happy to talk about any work for this class that has already happened or will happen during my office hours. If for whatever reason it's just not possible for you to meet with me over video call, I am happy to meet in an alternate time if that's preferable for you. I also am happy to talk via email. Please don't feel like you are asking a dumb question or that it's impeding on my time. I want to be of help, especially because we're not getting that face-to-face time we normally would get if this was an in-person synchronous course. So with that in mind, if I don't have students in my office virtually during these timeframes, I will be active on email. And so feel free to also send questions during these times, and I will be sure to be active and actively responding. In terms of the Zoom access information, I have provided the meeting ID and passcode here for your ease of use. They are also, of course, posted under the course materials module on Carmen. Now, in terms of your to-dos for this week, as always, you have a weekly overview provided in the schedule of assignments document. And you'll notice that it looks a little bit different for this part 2 of the semester because, as I said, part 2 is structured a bit differently than part 1 is. Now, with part 1, we were really thinking about kind of a conceptual overview of social media studies and media studies in a more traditional capacity. And so one of the goals that I set for part 1 of the semester was to introduce you to as many different types of texts as possible. And so the idea was that it would really allow you to get a sense of some of the far-reaching options and methodologies that are available to you when working on social media studies, while at the same time acknowledging that it's impossible for us to cover absolutely everything that exists out there. So what we're going to then do with part 2 is move more into kind of focusing on craft and more specifically writing craft. And so considering, when it comes to the work of writing about social media studies and producing social media studies in your own right, how does one create, writing techniques and analytical techniques that are going to really allow for you to most effectively communicate your ideas? So you're kind of stepping more formally into the role of writer than you were in for part 1 of the semester, right? So up until now, especially with things like the response papers and the highlight reels, you've been really focusing on understanding the argument and messages being communicated by writers in the text that you've been looking at. Whereas in part 2 of the semester, you're more so acting as that writer yourself, and you're working on creating a long form argument that will either take the form of a traditional research paper for the final or some kind of alternate format. So this week's reading is reduced exclusively to an excerpt from So What. You will be reading chapter 7, pages 155 to 182. It is a bit more substantial, but the idea here is that because we will be really clinging to So What and Who Says as our companion text going forward, it's going to be of the utmost importance, like I mentioned last week, that you are caught up on the textbook reading, because I'll be really relying on this textbook to guide some of the ways that we'll be structuring your research proposal, the literature review, and of course, your final project. And so you'll want to make sure that you're familiar with the terminology that comes from these 2 textbooks to ensure that you're in the best possible position to excel on your large ticket or kind of high value items in terms of the remaining assignments in the gradebook. I do want to flag that for next week, you will need access to the 3rd edition of Who Says, and we will be using Who Says for weeks 6 to 8. And you can find information on where to purchase and or rent this textbook in the course materials module on Carmen. If you run into any issues, please let me know, but you should be able to access an ebook copy of Who Says 3rd edition for a pretty low cost. And like I said, run into any issues, let me know, but at least based on my last check a few weeks ago, this is available to you online and is low cost at this point in time. So in terms of your assignments for this week, I do want to remind you that you do have response paper to do this week. As you already know, of course, from the Carmen message that I sent at the start of the week, you have an extended timeline for when you can turn that in of up until Wednesday as opposed to Monday. I think a good number of you are making use of that extended deadline, which is wonderful. My goal whenever offering an extended deadline submission timeline is that you use it. So please know that I'm more than happy if you're taking up until Wednesday to complete response paper 2, because I also owe you some feedback that you will be getting from me in the next day. In terms of, and feedback specifically about response paper 1, if you haven't gotten it already. But in terms of the formal kind of assignment deadlines for this week, beyond response paper 2, you have 2 things that you need to get done for week 5. The first of which is an individual writing assignment, which is the rough draft of research proposal, which counts towards 5% of your final grade. Now, originally, as you know, I talk about in my Carmen message, the original deadlines for this assignment would have been the Wednesdays at 11:59 p.m. Eastern deadline, right? And of course, typically speaking, with Wednesday assignments, you have until Friday at 3:00 p.m. Eastern to turn in this assignment. However, given that I was MIA for week 4 because of COVID, you have an updated deadline that I invite you and encourage you to use, especially if it makes your week easier and also if it just builds in time for you to rest and like enjoy your summer. So instead of being beholden to a Wednesday or Friday deadline for the rough draft of research proposal, instead, the rough draft of research proposal is now due on Saturday, June 11th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, which means that you can use the entire week to get this assignment done. I think it's worthwhile, namely because you are going to be getting feedback from your peers on this assignment. But again, if this creates opportunities for rest, opportunities for slowness, please use this opportunity to take more time on your research proposal in ways that also promote balance and wellness in your life. And like I've said, I'm behind. So I'm not expecting you to meet the previous deadline that existed here. The second assignment that you have for this week is a semester survival group assignment. And you'll see these come up throughout the part 2 of the semester, namely because this is going to be instances when you're providing feedback and receiving feedback from your group. So the peer feedback on research proposals is also 5% of your final grade. And this also has an updated deadline. So whereas previously this would have been a Saturday assignment, meaning that you would have needed to have turned this in by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, or if you couldn't make that time, you would have had until Monday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Now the updated deadline for the peer feedback on research proposals is Monday, June 13th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So you have the entire day on Monday to get this assignment done. Now, the reason why this is important is because your final draft of the research proposal is due next week in week 6. And so the idea here is that you'll get your peer feedback, in week 6 before you formally need to turn in that final draft. But it was important for me to make sure that you had a little bit more time on Monday, just so that this feedback is still usable to you, but also so that you have the additional time that you need to review the research proposals turned in by your peers. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move to assignment snapshots, or an overview of week 5 assignments. So again, in knowing that you have additional time to complete these assignments, my hope is that it promotes a better wellness balance for you for this week, but also just quite frankly gives you more time to think about what the heck do you possibly want to talk about in your final project. And as I mentioned before, this overview lecture really is a companion to the focus lecture, which is where I'm going to talk more substantially about the literature review and the final project, and really get into how all of these assignments are connected. So for simplicity and just kind of honestly, I think legibility's sake, I want to really focus the assignment snapshots in this overview lecture specifically to what's due this week. And you may find that this will make a bit more sense in terms of what it's building to once you actually engage with that focus lecture. So for now, let's just focus on what is due for this week, which of course begins with the research proposal and specifically the rough draft of the research proposal. And that's going to be something that we will see kind of covered best in this prompt, okay? So knowing that you have a rough draft and a final draft due of your research proposal, I want to mention that, the more that you can really spend time on this rough draft, the better position that you're going to be in to, create and submit a final draft that really, one, is able to get the most peer feedback possible, but also just quite frankly, I think is most useful for you because it's going to allow you to kind of hear from me and from your peers, what's going to be workable or feasible by the time you do that larger point value final project. Sorry for the sirens in the back. I'm going to pause. All right, our sirens are gone. Yes, okay. So you'll notice on the research proposal prompt that the rough draft deadline, of course, is Saturday, June 11th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So at the end of this week, you should turn in your rough draft of your research proposal. Now, the final draft of your research proposal is due next Wednesday, June 16th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. However, I will accept it up until Friday, June 18th at 3:00 p.m. Eastern. So if you're thinking about sort of long-term timelines, right? You definitely need to get your rough draft turned in by Saturday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern of this week. And your final draft, it could be turned in on Wednesday of next week, but it definitely has to be in by Friday at 3 o'clock of next week. Got it? All right. So you'll notice that the snapshot from the syllabus is pretty straightforward in the sense that it's pretty much laying out, what will be covered in the prompt that is provided in this extended version of the prompt. So as I mentioned in the syllabus, right, that a good research proposal is going to propose a research project topic related to social media and identity, will produce a tentative thesis statement that grounds the project, will offer research questions that will guide inquiry into this topic, and will state how this project contributes to contemporary discourse on social media. So what this is getting at here is the research proposal is meant to be kind of a sketch or a tentative idea of what you want to do on the final project for this class. And this final project should be organized around something related to social media, related to identity, and thinking about kind of how, based on what we've talked about and studied thus far, you can come up with a final project that's really putting the topics of social media and identity in conversation with each other, okay? So what do I mean by this? Basically with the prompt kind of explication here, what it tells us is that students must identify a research topic related to social media and self-representation that they would like to pursue throughout the 3-part semester research project. So your proposal is all about pitching an idea of what you think you'd like to do for the final. This research topic should be relevant in some way to a weekly theme, key concept, socio-political context, social media platform, or assigned to text that we have engaged with this semester. When developing a topic, students may either build on their existing body of work, such as a highlight reel, real reaction, or response paper, or they may create something entirely new that is informed by the work we have done in weeks 1 to 4. So I'm going to pause here. All right, so the research topic that you go with for this final could either be directly related to something that we've covered in this class, like digital blackface, or perhaps shadow banning, right? Or it can be something that we haven't covered yet. Perhaps it's a fandom or a subculture online. Perhaps it's some kind of online harassment or discrimination. Perhaps it's the effects of, social media on youth mental health or on folks of a marginalized gender's mental health, right? The idea being that there should be some sort of relationship between what it is that you're choosing to research and write about for your final and what we've talked about in class. Now, you'll notice on the previous slide I mentioned that we want to see social media and identity kind of being in conversation with each other in this project. And that remains true with this, kind of extended version of the prompt, in that when we're talking about self-representation, right, I'm asking you to consider how you can touch on this topic of, one's own identity being presented or mediated through social media in some capacity, right? That kind of speaks to, some sort of identity exploration or identity definition or something to that effect, right? So what I mean by that is I want you to really think about what is something related to social media that you'd be interested in researching and writing about that helps us to understand something about either your identity, the creator you choose to focus on, and their identity, maybe multiple identities of theirs, right? And this could be related to things like ethnicity, race, gender, sexuality, ability, national origin, citizenship, a range of things. It could be, membership in an online community. It could be participation in a fandom. It could be any number of things that help us to understand how someone utilizes social media in such a way that it allows them to represent themselves on their own terms, okay? Now, when you think about this semester research project, you may find that it's useful for you to kind of draw on something that you've already started. So maybe a highlight reel that you've created you're especially proud of and you would be interested in expanding on the ideas that you present there. Maybe one of your real reactions or response papers helped you to notice a particular primary or secondary source that you're especially interested in the topic of or the creator of, right? So the idea here is that you can either create something entirely from scratch, or you can utilize something that you've already submitted as the baseline or foundation of your final project. Any of those approaches is totally fine. But when it comes to the research proposal, your task is to produce a 1 to 2 page single-spaced proposal. Again, single-spaced, not double-spaced, single-spaced proposal in which you outline a potential topic, intervention, and methodology for the semester research project. So again, you're sketching, here's what I'm thinking of doing, here's what I'm thinking of focusing on, here's how I'm thinking of doing it. In doing so, you're going to demonstrate how your proposed project makes a contribution to the scholarly and popular discourse on social media representation that we have studied this semester. So as I mentioned, I'm going to go into more specifics of this in the focus lecture, but for now, what's really important is that you're going to want to create a 1 to 2 page single-spaced sketch or kind of pitch about what you're thinking of doing for the final, and it should touch on the how you're planning to do this, what you're thinking of focusing on, what you're thinking of including, and how this all relates to the topics that we've been covering thus far. So if you feel stuck at any point, it might be beneficial to revisit what were the weekly themes that we covered. It might be helpful to think about what text did we cover? Are there certain social media platforms that you're interested in that we didn't spend as much time on, right? All of those things can be helpful starting points when it comes to thinking about the idea you might want to work with and sort of start investigating by way of this research proposal. So this is going to be the structure section of the prompt that really gets into the how, or the how do you produce a research proposal. And what I'll do is I'll provide some example research proposals in my focus lecture so that you can take a look at those if you find that you're struggling with just like, oh, how do I write a research proposal, And so unfortunately my screen is kind of covering the top. Okay, there we go. So research proposal, preliminary outline, tentative ideas, what I'm moving in the direction of, right? It's sort of the I might do this. So the phrases like I might, I could, I'm tentatively interested in, those kinds of phrasings can be very helpful to utilize here. The idea is that I'm not expecting you to be married to a plan from the jump. It's that you're presenting an initial idea to get feedback from me on your peers on, so that we can figure out if this is a plan that's feasible based on what the final project is asking you to do and how much time you have to get it done, right? And so what you're really doing is you're acting as a scholar creator. You're thinking about, this is the project that I want to do. Here's how it's related to what is expected of me. And you're thinking about, how is this relevant to the ongoing conversation related to social media studies that you've already been engaged with by way of watching, reading, and listening to text in weeks 1 to 4. And so the purpose, once again, is not to provide a definitive answer in terms of the research questions that you pose, but instead to outline what you're interested in researching, why you're compelled by this topic, how you're going to potentially conduct this research, and how you would like to approach the content and form relationship featured in your final project. So in total, a research proposal is going to be 2 to 4 paragraphs in length. It's very short. Like I said, 1 to 2 pages, single spaced. And there are 2 sections for a research proposal. The first section is the reflection/purpose, and the second section is the methodology sketch section. Now, with that first section, what you're doing is you're detailing what facet of social media and self-representation that you'd like to focus on. So this is your what, if you will. This topic may be either tangentially related to class assignments and discussions or explicitly covered during the semester. Something brand new, something that we've covered. Either of those is fine. This section should be 1 to 2 paragraphs in length and should make clear the student's purpose for pursuing this project and should offer initial ideas for how their intervention will make a contribution to the discourse. So here is where in the proposal you're going to kind of talk about the what I'm interested in doing, and this is why I think it fits well based on what we've talked about thus far. This is what I like to think of as the what, or what type of pie is being baked section of the proposal. Now, in my focus lecture, I go into detail about argumentation as baking a pie, so that will make a little bit more sense when you watch that lecture. But for now, think about this as the what am I making section of your proposal. So for example, is there a real world problem, personal experience, underrepresentation in an industry, misrepresentation/stereotype in the media, social media trend, form of hashtag activism, or gap in the research that needs to be addressed in some way? This section should offer the tentative argument that the student is developing and pursuing in this project. While this argument is likely to change and evolve throughout the next few weeks, the student should still provide a thesis statement draft that can help guide their research. So again, this is where you're really kind of giving us the, here's what I'm thinking of making. You can imagine it as you're bringing something to a potluck. Here's what you're thinking of bringing. Now, the reflection/purpose section should be followed by the second section, which is the methodology sketch section. And this is where you're going to really offer that preliminary outline for how you're planning to conduct the close readings in your final project. Now, this section is once again going to be 1 to 2 paragraphs in length, and it should propose what text or texts will serve as the primary source or primary sources for the project and discuss how you're structuring your analysis of this primary source or primary sources. This is going to be your how. So how to bake or recipe card section of the proposal. Basically, like generally speaking, what you want to make. And this is where you're going to get into the how I'm going to do it part of that. And so this is where you're going to want to really think about what is it that you wish to analyze and how will you approach doing this analysis? How will you get it done? Okay. So to help answer this question, you're going to want to produce 3 to 5 research questions related to your topic that can help guide your process for researching and supporting the thesis. And like I said, I'll provide some examples of what research proposals look like, and you'll kind of see how students have, baked in these 3 to 5 research questions into their respective proposals. Sorry, still got that cough. In terms of formatting requirements, so your research proposal should be 1 to 2 pages, single spaced. 1 full page is minimum length and 2 full pages is maximum length. And so if a student produces a 1-page essay rather than a 1.5 or 2-page essay, the essay should fill the entire first page. Otherwise, it is half a page or 3/4 of a page. You need to make sure that you're giving me 1 to 2 pages single spaced. Now, MLA format with proper header and page number is expected with the research proposal. No works cited page is required. We'll deal with works cited pages when we get to the literature review. You do need to think about, though, what is the title of your project, and specifically the working title for your final project. This title should be unique to the project and should synthesize the proposed research topic / argument. It's important that you provide a title because it helps all of us workshop with you. Is it really giving us what it needs to give? And I'll talk more about titles in my focus lecture. Submission requirements. There are 2 submissions of this assignment, the rough draft and the final draft. Now, the rough draft is what's due this week. The final draft is what's due in week 6 or next week. The rough draft of this assignment should be submitted as a Google Doc that is uploaded to your semester survival group shared Google folder. It should be set to general access and anyone with the link can edit under sharing permissions. And I'll show examples of this in my focus lecture. The final draft of this assignment should be submitted to the submission portal on Carmen that is labeled Final Draft Research Proposal. Reason being, the rough draft is going to be reviewed by your peers, so they need access to it, which they only can have if it is uploaded to your shared Google folder. The final draft, you're sending to me exclusively, and so that's why it's going to Carmen. So keep those clear in your brain. Rough draft goes to your semester survival group folder. The final draft goes to me on Carmen. Now, the other assignment you've got for this week, which is related to this last point, is the first round of research project feedback. And you have 2 rounds of research project feedback in the second part of the semester. Now, this is where you're going to be providing peer feedback on research proposals for your semester survival group. And this again counts for 5% of your final grade. So you'll see that in the prompt for this, it's marked as both peer feedback on research proposals and marked as semester survival group work, just to help identify for you kind of where this is covered in the syllabus. Once again, the kind of original deadline for this assignment was Monday, June 13th at 8 a.m. Eastern. Now I'm accepting it up until Monday, June 13th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, so you have the entire day on Monday. Now, the snapshot from the syllabus reminds us that, again, we have 2 rounds of written feedback that you're providing to your semester survival group. And in total, they're going to count for 10%. So each is 5% of your final grade. And this is going to be when in weeks 5 and 8, you're providing feedback to your peers based on the drafts that they produce of their research proposal and ultimately of their final project. So what the prompt tells us is that after completing and posting your own rough draft of research proposal, you're then going to provide feedback to the members of your semester survival group on how they can further develop and refine their own research proposals before submitting the final draft in week 6. So you turn in your research proposal draft, then you look at your group's work and give them feedback on what is maybe beneficial to adapt, edit, change, keep as is, etc., before they turn in the final. The purpose of this assignment is twofold. First, it's designed to give students the opportunity to engage with a variety of research proposals so that they can consider if there are other writing strategies they may want to incorporate into their own work. That is, learning by observing various effective approaches to constructing a research proposal. What that means is You are doing this assignment in part to see by example different ways you can write a research proposal by looking at how your group members approach it. It's very similar to a real reaction. In a lot of ways, it's basically a real reaction that you're creating, except you are responding to each group member individually instead of creating a comprehensive response that you post to a discussion board, okay? So the idea here is you're doing this to get a sense of how other people approach this assignment, and are there ways that they've approached it that could be beneficial for me to emulate in my own work that would help enhance the effectiveness in communication, okay? The second reason is that it's designed to give you additional support, ideally to help improve your final grade, beyond the feedback that I provide by increasing the amount of feedback that you'll receive on your rough draft before submitting the final. So the other reason that you're doing this feedback is because I want to make sure that you have as many eyes on this as possible, because we are moving towards assignments that count for a lot more points towards your final grade, 50% to be exact, right? So it's important to me to make sure that you get as much feedback as possible that you can consult and utilize before turning in the final draft of your research proposal next week. So how do you complete this? There are a few steps that you need to take. First, you're going to want to go to your semester survival group shared Google folder, and you're going to want to open that folder and click on the orange folder titled Upload/Review Research Proposal Rough Drafts. This is also going to be where you submit your own rough draft of the research proposal. To give you an example, if you go to your group's shared Google folder, you'll notice that it's been reorganized by me, that now all of the highlight reels folders have been stored in this yellow folder titled Highlight Reels. And now there's one other folder, which is the orange folder titled Upload/Review. That is going to be where you turn in your own rough draft of your research proposal. And that's also where you will review your group members' research proposals. So pretty straightforward, put it in the orange folder. Now, once you open your semester survival group's shared Google folder and open the orange folder, you're going to be expected to read and respond to each group member's rough draft of research proposal. Okay, so you need to set aside the time to read everybody's work. Now, each draft that you read should be about 2 to 4 paragraphs in length and should feature 2 sections, the reflection/purpose section and the methodology sketch section. So as a reminder, everyone is turning in 1 to 2 single-spaced pages. So that's going to be the length that you can anticipate to be going through in the course of reading and responding to everyone's work. For each of these rough drafts, you will need to provide either brief annotations that are posted throughout the proposal, or endnotes that are posted at the end of the document following the proposal draft. That is, you are providing one of these feedback types, not both. And you'll want to make sure that your name is displayed with your feedback so that both I and your peer know who provided what feedback on the Google Doc. So you got to make a decision. You're reading and responding to everyone's work, but you need to decide, am I going to provide brief annotations or am I going to provide endnotes? Sometimes students prefer to do a combination where for some group members, they decide to do the brief annotations, and for other group members, they decide to do the endnotes. You could do that, or you could decide you're going to give everyone endnotes, or you're going to give everybody brief annotations. Whichever of those approaches is fine. You just have to make sure that everybody gets feedback from you and that that feedback has your name clearly displayed so that they know who it's from. This is in part, not only for me to give you credit, but also if someone has questions, then they know who to ask those questions of. So for each group member, you're going to write either brief annotations or endnotes that are in response to the ideas and writing presented in their rough draft of research proposal. This feedback can be on any of the following, and I provide some examples of what you might choose to comment on. Support for an idea that you find to be well suited for the assignment. So that could be affirmations, excitement or enthusiasm for the project of, thinking that certain things that they're deciding to focus on are going to work really well based on the final project. Suggestions on how to narrow the scope of the project. Maybe the idea that they're presenting is a little bit too big, and you want to give some comments on how they could narrow it down a little bit more. Recommendations for enhancing the clarity of a sentence or argumentative claim. If anything is confusing or you're not following along, be transparent in telling your group member that so that they can correct those things before they turn in a final version of this assignment. Suggestions for/reactions to the primary and or secondary source or sources proposed for use in the project. Maybe you really like that they decided to focus on an episode of Ear Hustle that we didn't listen to. And maybe you have some suggestions for what they could pair with that or what they could do with that, right? Alternatively, maybe you find that them proposing that they want to use all of the podcast Ear Hustle isn't going to necessarily be conducive to this assignment. And so you want to provide some suggestions for perhaps which episode or episodes they can focus on. That kind of thing would be beneficial here. And then finally, questions that could help guide the writers in next steps, whether on the final draft of the research proposal or on future assignments such as the literature review. So if you have some ideas or some concerns or just big picture items that you think would be beneficial for your group member to think about before pursuing this project formally, you can pose questions. They don't have to be conclusive statements where you absolutely know what needs to be adjusted or changed. It could just be that you present some questions for like, here's some things that you might want to think about that would help refine your project a little bit more, okay? So again, all of this is suggestions, not judgment, but suggestions for what they can do in their project that's going to help really refine the focus, enhance the communicative script strategies that are on display there, and help them ultimately achieve their best version of the final project. Now, if you decide to provide brief annotations, what you're going to want to do is use the comment function on Google Docs to post your responses to the ideas and writing included in each paragraph of the 2 sections of the research proposal. To receive full credit for having provided your peer with feedback, you should provide 5 to 10 substantial comments responding to the proposal draft. So they should not just be like, good job, that's great. Instead, they should meaningfully respond to the research proposal. So if you really find that the idea they're presenting is really compelling, then your comment should explain why it is that you think that this is going to be a really good fit for the final, right? Sorry if you can see my light flickering. You want to be really clear of like, you know, I think this is going to be a really successful final project because you're proposing this, this, and this. Point to specifics, be specific and detailed in these comments. Similarly, if you think that something is maybe going to make the scope of the project too big, or you're worried about something or unclear about something, be specific in those suggestions and recommendations so that they're actually workable for your peer. If you decide to do endnotes instead of brief annotations, and this is going to be, you know, in essence, what you get from me on a highlight reel submission, where I write a paragraph at the end where I respond, as opposed to commenting throughout like I do on response papers. For endnotes, you'll need to type your comments at the end of the Google Doc following the proposal draft. And so to receive full credit, you should provide 250 to 400 words responding to the proposal draft. So you'll be doing the same thing as in the brief annotations, but the difference is that it's formatted differently. If you find that it would be easiest for you to provide substantial feedback by commenting throughout the proposal, like the comments that I offer throughout your response papers, then go with that option. If you find that it would be easiest for you to provide substantial feedback by writing 250 to 400 words at the end of the proposal, like I do the end comments after reading your highlight reels or reviewing your highlight reels, then do that. But basically, you can see examples of what brief annotations versus end notes look like by looking at the type of feedback that I provide on comment. So you're either commenting throughout the proposal and directly attaching your feedback to where in the proposal you're talking about, or you're producing it and putting it at the end of the proposal for them to look at, you know, following reading through, you know, comments from other peers, as well as, you know, after you've read through the entire proposal. So really the difference here is between, do you want to comment as you go, or do you want to place it all at the end for them to read as kind of a standalone piece? Okay. So that is everything that I have for you today in my overview lecture for English 2367. Again, thank you so much for your patience and understanding. I will be sure to get my focus lecture up today because, you know, at the time of recording, this is Monday. And so I will have that focus lecture for you. As always, the Google Slides for this presentation and all presentations are provided in the related description box for the YouTube video. And I, of course, also provide them on Carmen under the course materials module as well. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. I am more than happy to talk about things related to this class, whether that be assignments, worries that you have, ideas that are kind of bubbling as you think about your final project, et cetera, et cetera. But I hope that you are doing well. I hope that you're staying safe during this recent surge of COVID and that you are happy, healthy, and having a wonderful summer in the midst of doing work and school related things that I'm sure are keeping you very busy. All right, everybody, it's great to be back with you, and I will talk with you soon.